Hello. Well, when I was publishing editor of Sportswoman, Thorsen's, a publishing house, asked me if I would write a book on women and sport. Well, yes, I thought that would be a good idea. I was an executive founder member, along with a few other women, including Kathy, of the Women's Sports Foundation in this country. And I was very, very busy with all aspects of women's sport. I thought the only way I could do it really was to sort of hook it on my own experience, because I'm a firm believer that, you can't get everything out of books. You have to live it. So to really know about something. So I thought I'd read a few pages from it, the book that I wrote, Women and Sport, foreword by dear Judy Simpson, who wrote a very nice introduction for me. And I thought I'd let you know a little of what was inside it. It's out of print at the moment, and I'm thinking of updating it, of course, and getting it reprinted. So watch this space, as they say. And of course, sport was what I was all about for many, many years, and still, of course, it interests me greatly. So this was the introduction. I'll read you a little of that, and I'll read you a little about a minority chapter too, that you might be interested in. I said, sports and physical play had no meaning for me until I was 8 years old. And before this, my excursions into the great outdoors were usually preceded by my mother picking me up kitten style by the scruff of the neck, tearing me away from the handy corner into which I tucked myself away, warmly reading an encyclopedia, and putting me down outside our kitchen door with the instruction to play and get some fresh air for at least 5 minutes. She would then bolt the door on my protest for the said amount of time. And like many other timid and studious children, I couldn't see the point in wasting time aimlessly playing, although I enjoyed the tap dancing and acrobatics lessons that were statutory for would-be film stars. Then one Saturday spring morning, I agreed to go to the local ice rink with my sister and the other children who lived in our road. I walked down the stairs inside the rink, and I still remember that strange mixture of smells, of rubber matting, leather skating boots, and mild sweat that hung suspended in the freezing cold air. The shining white surface of the empty ice pad stretched out before me. Trembling with fear and anticipation, I laced my feet into the hired skates and hung on like grim death to the 3-foot-high barrier that surrounded the ice. The ice closed around the edges of the steel blades beneath my feet and never let me go. The tomboy image. Happily for me, and seemingly unlike many of my sister's sportswomen, I was never called a tomboy. This was possibly because of my previous preoccupation with books and the more gentle art of dance. According to the concise Oxford Dictionary, new edition, a tomboy is a wild, romping girl who behaves like a boy. This is social acclimatization with a vengeance. How much more easily girls and young women would slip into their chosen physical recreational activity and sport were this word and its archaic definition deleted from the dictionary and thereafter relegated to the scrap heap. In an in-depth survey carried out in 1979 by Glasgow University, 70% of girls under the age of 16 said that they found enjoyment in and satisfaction in sporting activities. The dropout rate after 16 and or leaving school is horrifying. There is mounting evidence to suggest that a continuous mixed sports and games programme in schools could appreciably slow down and eventually, I would aver, halt this miserable trend. One good thing about sport is that it teaches you to learn from those more practised and rehearsed than yourself. In this instance, the male sports modus operandi. How have they achieved their erstwhile supremacy? And there I continue to talk about how women's sport has been, sidelined and so on. Now, I was writing this in 1988. So, they also asked me, there are various chapters on drugs, on whether sport is fun, bodybuilding and weight training, fitness, the fitness boom, whose media is it anyway, of course, and the competitive urge. There's also a training schedule in it that I worked out on the background of the study of Dr. Dalton's on the menopause and the food factor. I've done that, and now I sent it all in and thought, oh, that's that, after I'd done the manuscript. And the editors there at Thorsen's came back to me and said, well, we'd like you to do a chapter on minority sports. And I have always thought that minorities as such should be required and requested to be asked themselves, and not have, people from other ethnicities writing about what they think is good for them. For instance, I'm a firm upholder of the fact that black women can only talk about their own experiences. They don't need white women telling them about their experiences, for instance. So I thought, how am I going to do this? And then I remembered I was part of a minority myself. I was a Jew. So I started from that, and I said, having embarked on my chosen sport at an early age, it wasn't until I'd passed my 14th birthday that my father, coming to collect me at the ice rink one Sunday morning, inadvertently noticed me skating, only because he'd arrived a few minutes earlier than usual. He beckoned me to him with an imperious gesture, and after 2 quick circuits of the rink, I sailed to a spectacular hockey stop in front of him. I was greeted with, "Is this what I've paid out all this money for all these years, to watch you going round and round like a goldfish in a bowl? I thought you'd be another Sonia Heaney by now." He then muttered that he would wait for me outside, and that was the last time he ever saw me skate. I fared better with my mother. She came to watch me for the first time when I was in training at the same rink 16 years later. She sat at the rink side in virtually the same spot where my father had stood all those years before, looking conscientiously interested but slightly chilled. She then accompanied me to an international race meeting at Bruges in Belgium a few weeks later. In 1981, when I was 40, my mother again visited the ice rink to watch me coaching her grandson, who was about to be placed 3rd in the first ever Junior British Ice Speed Skating Championships. It was her turn to call me over from the centre of the ice, where I had been timing my son. I've got to go now, dear, but I must say that I think you are being a little too hard on Lee. I just thought I'd tell you how I felt. That was the first and last time she ever watched him skate. Why all this disinterest in my sporting activities? Having been born into a Jewish family, I was not expected to interest myself in anything as Philistine as sport. Within the context of Jewish tradition, I did not suffer discouragement because of my gender, but rather because of ethnic aestheticism. Nobody ever watched my brother on school sports days either. Apart from obvious hard and fast religious orthodoxy, which would certainly militate against women's participation in sport, plus a general restriction on anything but prescribed activity on the Sabbath, which stretches from sunset on Friday till sunset on Saturday, there are parallel philosophies which make it de trop to take part in anything which might smack of human animality, because over the centuries, people living beyond the pale of Jewish existence have perceived Jews as a non-physical group. It has reinforced modern-day concepts of Jews having brains and no brawn. They have also mistaken dignity for cowardice and reluctance for inability. The inauguration of the State of Israel in 1948 went a great way towards altering some of the most common misconceptions about Jews with reference to sport in particular. Suddenly there came the opportunity to take part as an identifiable nation, occupying its own piece of ground in world affairs. This was a country not only peopled by survivors of death camps, where many had filed with quiet dignity for their turn in the gas chambers rather than sink to the bestial level of their captors by trying to kill them instead, but also with people who had fought back and survived barely armed rebellions such as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and fought against both the British and Arab armed forces. Outside of Israel, there have been many instances which record negative feelings towards the Jews as a group, and very few non-Jews have taken up cudgels in defence of any other identifiable minority or oppressed racial group. This has also served to convince Jews that sport, with its avowed ethos of fair play, providing leaders of men, may not actually mean them, or extend to Jews generally. And one of the most shocking and shameful examples of the kind of negligence to which I refer took place at the Munich venue of the Olympic Games. 8 Palestinian Liberation Organization terrorists invaded the Israeli quarters in the Olympic Village. They took 9 Jewish competitors hostage with 2 of their coaches. Lord Kilanin, then president of the International Olympic Committee, arrived back for an emergency executive meeting from Kiel, where he was going to watch the yachting in the company of the head of Krupps, in a Krupps private plane. For those who might not know, after World War II, on hearing evidence that Krupps used slave labour from the concentration camps, that some of these Jewish slaves were hanged with piano wire in full view of their fellow workers as an object lesson in productivity, the Allies promised to shut them down. The terrorists demanded the release of 256 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel in return for the release of the hostages. Israel refused to trade and requested the postponement of the Games. They were postponed, but only from 3:30 p.m. until the following day. Meanwhile, the German government had moved marksmen to the site. At this point, the terrorists were threatening to bring out and shoot 1 hostage every hour. Just after midnight, when all the Jews and most of the Arabs were dead, the German officials announced a press conference to be held at 3 o'clock in the morning. The press had to wait through a 45-minute speech before someone asked in desperation whether the hostages were alive or dead. The executive board of the IOC made this announcement later that day. Quote, "The Olympic Games are proceeding for the sake of sport and sport only. All official receptions are cancelled. All ceremonies will be kept as simple as possible." Close quote. As if that was the only recognition of the disaster that was needed. Yet this act took place within a sporting framework that had encompassed the participation of and also ignored the historic contribution made by a Jewish team competing at one of the earliest Olympic Games some 2,000 years before, albeit a team without women members. And the majority of Jews at that time were becoming increasingly suspicious of the Hellenization of Israel, particularly as delegates to the Olympics were expected to take with them gifts for Hercules. There was a protest made at the 152nd Games, which were held simultaneously in Greece and at Tyre, when the Jewish contingent sent by Herod refused to donate to paganism. Anyway, I think that it gives you some of the drift of that particular chapter, and I think hopefully that it'll give you some idea of the problems that beset people from particular ethnic minorities that are not keen on sports participation, or particularly women's sports participation. And I go on then, of course, to talk about other minority groups in Africa, in the continent of Africa, various countries there, and so on and so forth. So, you know, there's lots and lots and lots in this book that you might find interesting, all about food, training. There's a training plan, as I mentioned, sporting life. And the last words I will tell you in my book: my granddaughter Michelle will be 21 in the year 2001 and will spend her sportswomanhood in the 21st century. She enjoys karate, netball, dance, BMX racing, and wants to be a speed skater. I shall leave the last words on women's sport to her. The words she spoke to me as she got on the ice at my home rink for the first time. "I think it's brilliant. Watch me." There. So I hope that you liked that little excerpt from my book. There's lots and lots of different stuff in it, and perhaps I'll read you another chapter or so at another time. Bye for now. Bye. Bye.